if we have a look at the webinar outcomes, we've got quite a few different things to look at, but they all tie in to the same wording and the same sample extract that we're going to be focusing on today. So we'll start by looking at an overview of the mechanics of preemption. And one of the key things to get to grips with is we're going to be looking at the preemption on rights of transfer. And we're going to make sure that you're really happy that that's different to the statutory rights of preemption on the issue of shares. We'll think about permitted transfers to family members, and then we'll think about some of the more tricky areas. So we'll look at the approaches to valuing the shares, and we'll think about different ways your clients might want to do that. We'll talk about allocating the shares between the remaining shareholders. We'll think about how you find your buyers, so issues to think about and considerations. And then we'll finish up looking at good leaver and bad leaver provisions, so when they're appropriate and potentially the risk that they could possibly be void if they were a penalty. Now, I mentioned sample wording, and what you'll have in the note pack, at the very end of your note pack, is some sample wording. Now, it's not a precedent, but it's a really useful way to have a guide as to what we're talking about today. So as we go through the webinar, I'll refer to different clauses that you can then look at in that sample extract to see how it can be actually written down in a preemption clause. And there are a whole variety of options in terms of valuations. So I've put some alternatives on the slide. You might want a multiple of profits or turnover or EBITDA. And that depends on the economic conditions generally and the specific market. You might want to do it on the net asset value of the company. You may also want to go down the Russian roulette or Texas or Mexican shootout. And I'll just briefly explain the difference between a Russian roulette and a Mexican shootout. So a Russian roulette is the seller serves notice that they want to sell their shares for X amount per share. When the buyer receives that notice, they can choose to accept that offer, or they can turn the offer round on the seller and say, no, I will buy your shares for that amount. And the theory is that it encourages the seller to offer a fair or sensible price because they could end up having to face their own offer. Texas shootout is the same, but with a third level, which is they can reverse the offer, and then if they don't agree to that, they can send it to sealed bids, and the highest bidder wins. Now, both of those methods can seem quite crude, but they do save time and they do avoid pointless rows over value. But it's just thinking about agreeing how you're going to do it in advance. And there are other practicalities you might want to include in your draft. So, for example, completion arrangements, such as the stock transfer form and the share certificate, payment, cash on completion, for example, and what happens if there's a failure to sell. So, for example, does the seller have the right to sell to anyone else within a specific time limit, as long as it's at a price not lower than the fair value already agreed?